I'm going to switch to English right away because, of course, for Mona's benefit. I first of all want to thank everybody for coming. I mean, this is a wonderful turnout, and deservedly so. We have a very special guest here that I hope will be engaged in a conversation not just with me, but also with you. Secondly, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. This is personal, of course, extension of gratitude to Sasha and to Damir and the rest of the team. As an academic, I feel somewhat of an outsider, of course, in the literary world, but at the same time, I would like to, choose this opportunity and use the opportunity to bridge some of those gaps that exist between academia, the bubble of academia and the bubble of novelists and poets. And in this case, of course, Mona, who really will need to tell us where she stands in this context. Now, I would like to organize this session a little bit in order to situate Mona's work and her role in not only in what she does, but also in terms of its resonance for academics on the one hand, but also for general public on the other. So I'm trying to think of, or I've thought about perhaps organizing this in 3 parts, with the first one talking more directly to Mona about her and her work and her, the way in which she locates herself in this world and in terms of her own activism and writing. Then, in a way, try to link something that to perhaps something that would help me with when I, one day when I actually introduce your work to my students, I will need to know where to locate you in relation to other writers who engage in similar topics. And then I think at the end we would like to perhaps open it up to conversation of much broader resonance, more broadly how it relates to the rest of us, the rest of the world. So because this is not just a regional issue, it's not just a cultural issue or religious issue, it's something that concerns us all globally in the world in which we reside and which we would like to make better in some ways. So let's start perhaps with the book. Without going too much into the details of the book, I would like to perhaps offer a reflection on how I've received your book, how I've seen the book, and I would like you to, if you could reflect on that, and if you could maybe then tell us how you got to where you are now, in reference, of course, to the text. Having read Headscarves and Hymens, I thought how it combines really 3 very difficult elements. It blends 3 very difficult elements. Difficult in terms of writing and also difficult in terms of experiencing. One is the descriptive, journalistic. This is your, of course, forte as with your professional background. You know how to write about situations. You describe them well. You report well. So there is a clarity of expression there that has a certain objectivity to it. Then there is a kind of prescriptive element in which you, perhaps not directly, but indirectly and very suggestively call for action. It's really a way of saying, we need to do this. Let us all participate in this. So even when it is not explicit, it's implicitly there. And then the third element, what I find fascinating, is performative. That your body is there engaged in the action itself, and that in that sense you utilize your body, if you wish. You somehow present yourself in ways that is not dissociated from this either descriptive or prescriptive dimensions. So I would like to ask you how you blend these things together. I mean, it's a very vulnerable, in some ways, position to be. I mean, the body is something that we don't like to expose too much, or for that matter, hide too much. So how do you negotiate that, and how you? So what does that do to you as a writer, as an activist?
First of all, thank you, Amila, and I'm very excited to be in conversation with you today because you're someone I admire greatly. So I look forward to our conversation. And good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming out. It's always great to see a great audience like this for feminism, because you hear all this nonsense about how we don't need feminism anymore, and that is total and utter bullshit. Clearly, we need feminism everywhere, and I'm glad to see so many young women and men here. So thank you for coming. And I want to thank Bookstan, I want to thank Sasha Hemon a friend of mine and a writer, again, who I admire greatly, and Amila and Damir and the entire team, and BuyBook for publishing my book in Bosnian and making it accessible to you all. I'm thrilled and honored to be in Sarajevo. Before I begin any of these events, and I've spoken, you know, this year I've spoken in Lahore and in Johannesburg and in a very rich and very white kind of la-la land called Aspen, Colorado, just last month. And wherever I speak, I usually begin my events by saying, fuck the patriarchy, because that is the definition of the work that I do. So, having established that as the foundation of my work, let's talk about how I got to my book. Well, you know, I began my professional career as a journalist. And I was a journalist with Reuters news agency, and the worst thing you can do as a journalist and as a news reporter is to say I. You cannot say I. You are so detached from everything. Even if you have an opinion about something, because obviously there's no such thing as objectivity, so if you have an opinion about something, you find someone to interview who will express that opinion for you. And every journalist knows how to do this. But you know, you do it through someone else, yeah? And then I moved, so this was in Egypt and in the Middle East, so I was a reporter from various cities in the Middle East and North Africa. And then I moved to the United States in 2000. And very soon after I moved to the US, I realized I wanted nothing to do with journalism because I despise journalism in the United States. It's the worst kind of narcissism. And you saw this during when the United States invaded Iraq, where a country was being dismantled and destroyed. And Baghdad, for us in the Middle East, is a very dear city. And I remember speaking to my father just before the Americans went to invade Iraq, and my father said to me, do these Americans understand what Baghdad means to us? Do they understand what it's like for us to watch Iraq being invaded like this? Can you imagine if it was Cairo? But you would turn on the news in the United States, and it was just those who were for Bush and those who were against Bush, and American reporters with badges, pins on their suits with the American flag, and they were saying, we. And the only role that Iraqis, whose country was being destroyed, played was as the background, the characters, the specimens in a museum in the background to this American adventure. So I despise American journalism. So I wanted nothing to do with news reporting when I went to the US, but before the invasion of Iraq was 9/11. And I was in Seattle when 9/11 happened, and when 9/11 happened, it brought a world that I was familiar with in Egypt because we had a lot of militant violence in Egypt. I don't like the word terrorism because as a Reuters correspondent, we never ever use the word terrorism. And you know that old saying, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Don't want to get into those arguments. So we had a lot of armed militancy in Egypt that was killing a lot of Egyptians that, you know, rarely made headlines unless it was a spectacular attack, like when it was in Hatshepsut Temple. And the only thing that was reported for international consumption was that it was 52 tourists and, you know, fuck the Egyptians who were killed. Because at the end of the day, we're always, you know, in the background. So when 9/11 happened, it brought that kind of violence into the American sphere now. And then you were watching the Americans basically saying, you know, how dare they attack us? Now, obviously, I was against the attacks of 9/11 as I am against the attacks of militant violence anywhere. But it was now something that was worthy of everybody's attention. And I hope we talk about worthy victims in our discussion, because it's something that's very dear to me. And so that, for me, was the final kind of legitimate death of objectivity. I could no longer be that news reporter who was at a distance. And that's when I left news reporting behind and I became an opinion writer, because I had to express my opinion. Not just because now we have to pay attention, because America and Americans were hurt, but because the people that they brought onto the TV screens to explain what happened did not represent me in any shape or form. They brought old Muslim men who always had an accent, whose Islam had nothing to do with my Islam, or women in headscarves, if women even featured at all, who again did not represent me. So I forced myself to use I. So I began to write opinion pieces that were mostly published in the Washington Post about the experience of, you know, an Egyptian Muslim woman in the United States after 9/11 and you know, Egypt and the support of successive US administrations to the fascist regime that we fight in Egypt, etc., etc. So that's where the I began to enter. And then the other big jolt in my life, I would say, was when the Egyptian revolution began. Well, the Tunisian revolution first, because Tunisia is always ignored. Tunisia is a much smaller country than Egypt, and Egyptians are very chauvinistic, and we think that we've given the world everything. But this revolution really began in Tunisia. And Tunisia is really the country that broke down that door and allowed us to imagine a dictator running away. And that was something that I had been dreaming of all of my life, as so many of my Egyptian friends and relatives had. And then I lived in New York at the time, but I went back to Egypt soon after. I wasn't there for the 18 days. So I went back for a sit-in in July, and then I went back again in November. And I wasn't supposed to be there in November. I was supposed to be, ironically enough, at the EU, speaking in front of the European Parliament about women in revolution. And I cancelled that trip. I had my ticket, I had my hotel room and everything, because this iconic battle broke out between the revolution and soldiers and the police, very close to Tahrir Square. And I remember I was in Morocco at the time for a conference, and I was just following what was happening in Egypt and crying, and I had to go back. So I cancelled my Brussels trip, and I went back to meet my fate, basically, because what happened was, during these protests, Egyptian riot police beat me and broke my arms, sexually assaulted me, and I was detained by the police and then by military intelligence. And then, as a writer, that was the next big jolt for me, because both of my arms were in a cast for 3 months. Now, up until that point, words were the way that I expressed myself, even when I began to use the I. But I couldn't write, because both of my arms were in casts. And that's when I began to realize that my body now was a way to convey my message. Because I was appearing on all this media talking about what happened to me, because I was lucky I survived, because I had a platform. It happened to so many other Egyptian women and so many other Egyptian men too. But the specific violence that I was subjected to was a very sexualized kind of violence. So you could see me with my the two casts and everything. And so I realized that, this is where also the performative and the I had to come in. And I realized then that my body was the canvas that I could write a message on to convey, my next kind of stage, if you like, of activism and writing.
Yeah, it was quite extraordinary to see, actually, during the Tahrir protests, and actually the Gezi Park as well in Istanbul, the mix of men and women taking to streets. But then, as you say, galvanizing another kind of violence in gender terms, yes. Gendered violence.
Yes.
Can you tell more about that? I mean, obviously you were one of the people who were the victim of it. Yes. But can you tell us about other women who may have undergone, yes. Or men for that matter, who may have undergone a similar violence? During that, after all, the protest was about a particular goal, but then of course it has all these other dimensions which are sometimes hidden, and sometimes, in fact, need to be spoken of post facto.
Well, I always tell people, and this connects to why I wrote my book as well, and why I do use my body as a form of expressing, what I want to say. When the Tunisians rose up against Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali, when the Egyptians rose up against Hosni Mubarak, and then the revolution moved to Libya and Yemen and Syria and Bahrain, and the various manifestations that they continue or have been killed today, those revolutions were what I call political revolutions. And those political revolutions happened out of an understanding that the state oppresses everyone. The state oppresses men and women, and that is without a doubt. But what happens to women when they go home from those revolutions is the point that I'm obsessed with. Some people falsely believe that just because a man is a revolutionary, or just because a man is an activist, that he's ipso facto feminist, or he's not a misogynist shit. And it's not true. A man needs to prove to me, even if he's the biggest revolutionary, that he's actually a feminist or he believes in gender equality. So, and this is where the sexualized violence began to come out, because what you saw was, I think it was this guttural reaction from patriarchy, whether it was now the state, which oppresses everyone, or the street or the home. Because the way that I describe what's happening now is the region is stuck in this political revolution of patriarchs fighting patriarchs, whether they're religious, whether they're military, whatever background, it's men fighting men. But you have to see that in the context of the state, the street, and the home. Because if the state oppresses men and women, the state and the street and the home, in this triangle, which I call the trifecta of misogyny, the state, the street, and the home together oppress women. And this is where I have to put in the middle this sexualized violence, because there was this understanding by the state and the streets and the home that they had lost control of women. In a country like Egypt, for example, where it's taboo and completely forbidden for women to spend the night outside of the home, you had a night with boys and doing sex. This is what they said the revolutionary women were doing. So the state, the street, and the home understood that it had lost control of women. And so they all worked in unison to bring women back. And where do they bring women back to? Into the home. Because if the Mubarak in the presidential palace and the Mubarak on the street and the Mubarak in the home all oppress us, the worst Mubarak, the worst dictator is in the home, because they all go home. So the hardest revolution is in the home. So you began to see these incredible acts of vicious violence. I mean, it got so bad that women in protests would be surrounded by 10 to 20 men who acted in a mob, and they would strip these women and rape them with their fingers. There was one 19-year-old woman who was, and I'm sorry if I trigger anybody here, but forgive me, I have to be explicit. There was one 19-year-old woman who needed a hysterectomy because she was raped with a blade. She was raped with a knife, a switchblade. Who does this? Who does this to a woman in a protest? So this is why I'm saying it was this guttural fear and terror and hatred of the idea that they had lost control of women.
I mean, who does this to a woman, period? I mean, not in protest or anywhere. I mean, it's really quite an extraordinary thing. And how, in fact, many of these crimes are undercover crimes. They're crimes that do not really have ever actually...
No one speaks, because you know,
of.
the street where I was assaulted, it's called Muhammad Mahmoud Street, and it's the street where my university was. So I used to go to the street all the time when I was younger. I found out afterwards from a feminist movement in Egypt who asked me if I would sue the regime, and I said, yes, of course I would, that at least 12 other women were subjected to the exact kind of sexual violence where you're sexually assaulted and then threatened with gang rape. But none of them would speak. And then you all, I'm sure, remember the iconic image of a woman being dragged through Tahrir Square. She was stripped to her blue bra and soldiers stomped on her chest. To this day, we do not know her name because her family is ashamed of what happened to her. This woman is a revolutionary hero who deserves a statue. In the same way that we have the statue for the unknown soldier, this woman has been silenced by her family. If I can, I would like to connect this to what happened here in Bosnia, because I'm talking about this awful, guttural violence that enacts itself on the bodies of women. I don't have to tell you here because you know of what happened to women during the war. Whether it was rape by neighbors or whether it was the sexual enslavement camps. What has happened to these women? Have they received any kind of justice? Do they speak? Do you listen to them when they speak? Or is this again a form of taboo and shame? This is universal, this is global, and this comes from the understanding, the teaching of patriarchy, that men own our bodies and men own public space. And if the women here dare to go out into public space, you are blamed for what happens to you. When I have conversations like this in American university campuses, I tell the audience, I don't know the statistic here, but in the United States, I tell the audience 25%, that is 1 of every 4 women in this room. If it was the US, I don't know what's the statistic here. 1 in every 4 women in a university lecture hall has been sexually assaulted. This is universal.
And usually by somebody they know, which is an important point. There was a very, at some level, ironic comment that was made after the coup or failed coup in Turkey by one of the supporters of Erdogan that women were not assaulted during the protests following the failed coup. But actually there were no women in the street in the first place. And you know, there were protests, of course, and there were reactions to the coup and support cheer to Erdogan, but women were absent. What do you say about that kind of political engagement in which women, in fact, are not there?
Not only were women largely absent, but the opposing sides, the enemies, the various enemies in the Turkish scenario were saying things like, do you have a daughter? And then, you know, this general from the failed coup or whatever would say yes, and then the Erdogan guy would go, I will rape her. Again, I will rape your wife, I will rape your daughter. Again, this punishment that is, so you punish your enemy, you emasculate your enemy by raping his woman. But a feminist group in Turkey issued a statement saying that not only are all the parties involved, whether pro-coup or anti-coup or opposition groups, threatening the women that belong to all these men with sexual violence, but the few women who did turn out were subjected to sexual violence in protests. Occupy Wall Street. There were women who were sexually assaulted during Occupy Wall Street. And in all of these scenarios, the common factor? The women are told to shut up because you're going to make the revolution look bad. So not only are you expected to be prepared to be violated, because men use our bodies as proxy battlefields, our body is just one of the many so-called theatres of war, but you also have to shut up about it because you're going to make the revolution look bad. Because people will say, well, revolutionaries, kill. But you asked me earlier about other women. And this is where I consider myself very lucky. This is where we often use this word privilege, and this is where I feel very privileged. After I was sexually assaulted and threatened with gang rape, when I was taken in November, I know that I survived, and I know that I wasn't gang raped, and I know that I wasn't disappeared into an Egyptian jail, because people know who I am, because I have the privilege of a platform, because I was able to tweet from the Interior Ministry, beaten, arrested Interior Ministry, and people started a campaign to release me, including the State Department. If I was an anonymous, working class, poor Egyptian woman, I would have disappeared, because our jails are full of anonymous, working class, unprivileged Egyptian women and men. But the women face an extra layer of repression through this targeted sexual violence.
Now, in light of all of that you are saying, how do you define sexual revolution, as you suggest? I mean, what does it mean to you, and what do you think that, in fact, how is it different from previous calls for sexual revolution or previous attempts at change?
Right. Well, I haven't kind of laid the background for that by saying, that women, when we dare to go out into public space, when we dare to lay claim to men's things like revolution and public space and Tahrir Square and all of this, and having also laid out the groundwork of, or the foundation of all of this, where women are silenced when they're sexually violated. For me, without that sexual revolution, without that social revolution, as I said, the political revolution will fail. And I define that sexual revolution very, very specifically. The sexual revolution for me begins with the declaration, I own my body. Not the state, not the street, not the home, my family, not the mosque, not the church, not the temple. I own my body. When I make that declaration, when I fight against these so-called virginity tests from our fascist dictator, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and his fellow generals, it's a revolutionary act. When I fight against street sexual violence that tries to push women into the home, whether it's catcalls or someone groping my backside or anything, it's a revolutionary act. When I fight against female genital mutilation, which in Egypt and other countries is to control women's sexuality, it's a revolutionary act. When I fight against marital rape, domestic violence in the home sphere, it's a revolutionary act. But the biggest kind of definition for me of the sexual revolution, and I say this as an Egyptian Muslim woman who was brought up with the belief that I must wait to get married to have sex. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And I waited until I was 29 because I couldn't find anyone to get married to, and then I got fed up of waiting. So I was like, fuck this. I am going to have sex. And having finally broken this virginity shit at the age of 29, I was overwhelmed with guilt. And I tell people that I overcame the guilt by fucking it out of my system. So I have had plenty of sex and I have no more guilt. So now, the sexual revolution now, like the biggest definition, is I have moved from the 29-year-old virgin to the, I'm going to be 49 in 2 days, to the 49-year-old woman who says, it is my right, because I own my body, therefore it is my right to have sex with whomever, obviously with their consent, and consent is a good thing. So it is my right to have sex with whomever, whenever, whether it's with a woman, whether it's with a man, whether it's with three, because I do not do monogamy. So it's with whoever I want, under my conditions. But that's the core definition for me of the sexual revolution. And I insist on talking about sex, because everything is about sex. Because they violate us in the street when we go out on the revolution, because they know it will shame us and send us back home. In Lebanon, when a feminist group tried to pass a domestic violence bill for the first time in Lebanese history, the leaders of the various Islamic communities and Christian leaders in Lebanon, so this is now the unification of religions in a country that has long been divided along religious lines, the one thing that they agreed on was that in this law against domestic violence, they had to remove language on marital rape, and not just make marital rape a crime, take that out. The imams and the priests forced language into this law against domestic violence that gave a husband the right to have sex with his wife when he wanted. So when I say, I own my body, and it is my right to have sex with whomever, whenever, fighting that kind of backward shit is a revolutionary act.
Very nice, okay. I think that, of course, you talk about why the Middle East needs a sexual revolution. Of course, in that definition, this is much more
Everywhere.
much farther reaching. But I also want to then include here the issue around LGBT rights, and how do you feel that you speak to that segment of society as well? I mean, how do you...
Well, that's why I say it's my right to have sex with a woman or a man. It's my right to have sex with whoever I choose. And I think it's incredibly important for me as a feminist to constantly link and identify with queer issues. Because queer issues and feminist issues have the same enemy. It's patriarchy. And we have the same enemy because patriarchy not only teaches that men own women's bodies, but it also teaches a very specific way to be a woman and a very specific way to be a man. And I fight this as a feminist, and I fight this as, call me whatever you want, queer ally, whatever you want. And it's very important, especially again, obviously globally, but when you talk about the parts of the world where I come from, and this is one of the reasons that Rabia Alam ad-Din is one of my personal heroes, because when I was that, 2021, I bought Kool-Aid's, his book, and it was the first time in my life that I read an Arab writer write openly about being gay, and it blew my fucking mind. And so I've loved Rabia, and I've stalked him ever since, he will tell you. Thank you, Rabia. So when I speak about my part of the world now, in Tunisia, an LGBTQ NGO recently got a license, but it's been a fight, they get the license revoked. And the vice president of this LGBTQ movement, a young man called Ahmed, has tried to commit suicide twice in the past 5 weeks. Why? Because of this homophobic shit. Because when you think of patriarchy, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, our fascist dictator in Egypt, he's the best representation of patriarchy. Because in Egypt right now, even though he's not the Muslim Brotherhood, I detest the Muslim Brotherhood, and I detest military rule. I want neither. I want secular, civil rule. When you look at what Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has been doing, he's engaged in a moral crusade in which every week a gay man ends up in jail in Egypt, every month a trans woman ends up in jail, and every 5 or 6 weeks a belly dancer or a pop star ends up in jail. Because in the fascist world, the perfect human being is the heterosexual, conservative, religious man. And anyone who deviates from that is punished. So if you are a so-called effeminate man, as men like to, as people use the derogatory terms to describe gay men, that is considered the worst that you can be, because you've given up this right to be the best in society, which is this very masculine, macho man. So I tell people that the whole point of feminism is that feminism takes apart those constructed notions of what a real woman is and a real man is. And so naturally, of course, feminist issues and LGBTQ issues have to diverge because we have a common enemy. And when I take it to the United States, I add another element. Because in the US, it's all of these anti-patriarchal movements. But in the United States, it's race, class, and gender. Because it has to be about race, and it has to be about class. It's not just about feminism. And that's where we get into discussions of white feminism, and I identify as a woman of color, or global feminism, transnational feminism, whatever you... Because I don't have the privilege to fight just misogyny. I have to fight misogyny, I have to fight racism, I have to fight classism, ableism, homophobia, all of these isms, because they are the enemy that patriarchy uses against me.
On that note, in terms of self-identification, and I don't want to use here the word identity because it's too laden with, connotations of social science, but more in terms of how, when you talk about yourself as a Muslim and as a feminist, I'd like you to think about women that you can relate to along this spectrum, particularly in relation to Islam, in relation to that Muslim aspect of your identity, because I think this is where first of all, on the one hand, we have a crisis of terminology, as Amila Buturović says. We don't know really what we mean by Islamic feminists or Muslim feminists or feminists who espouse, or try to overcome patriarchal rules and mores, etc., within the Islamic world. At the same time, we also don't really know how to connect that with feminism in the West, which is often accused of being Eurocentric and coming out of a particular secularist model that does not really apply to other parts of the world. And we get very annoyed when Barbara Bush goes and teaches women's rights to Muslim women. Where do you locate yourself in that regard? And specifically, I mean, there have been women in the Middle East in the past who have done fantastic work in terms of their feminist agendas, from Nawal Saadawi to Fatima Mernissi, and so on and so forth. And how different your activism is in relation to theirs? How you see yourself in relation to them?
Well, I very much consider myself their daughter, if you like, to be cheesy about it. Because, I mean, I did not have to look to the West to get my feminism. I discovered feminism, ironically enough, on the bookshelves of my university in Saudi Arabia. And, there's no women's and gender studies in Saudi Arabia. This is back in 1986. But some is either the librarian, and hi Amra, this is for you because librarians rock. Some librarian or some renegade dissident professor in my university in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, created a shelf for feminist journals and feminist books. So I discovered the work of Fatima Mernissi, a Moroccan sociologist, Nawal Saadawi, and others. And they gave that word feminism to me. And it saved my mind, because I was losing my mind in Saudi Arabia. And what they wrote as women from my cultural and religious background literally saved my mind. And then when I moved back to Egypt later in the 1980s, I interviewed Nawal Saadawi. Now I'm going to give you two examples of two quite different feminists. So I interviewed Nawal Saadawi, who's a veteran, iconic Egyptian feminist, who's now about 84 years old. And when I would interview her, she would always tell me, my grandmother told me that God was truth, justice, and freedom. No, love, justice, and freedom. That's what religion and God for her was. Love, justice, and freedom. So her feminism and the feminism of Fatima Mernissi, and all the way back to the 1920s when Hoda Sha'rawi, as an Egyptian woman, removed her face veil and said this is a thing of the past. So this fucking face veil, which we're still arguing about today, in 1924, an Egyptian woman removed it and said this is a thing of the past. And here we are 100 years later still arguing about it. Anyway, so we have an indigenous feminist movement. I did not need to go and import it from the West. But who did I find in the so-called West? I found a black American scholar of Islam called Amila Buturović. Amila Buturović is a scholarly, and you know her, Amila, so you know this. Amila Buturović has a PhD in jurisprudence. She knows Islam inside out. And she has been engaged in Islamic feminism. I do not identify as an Islamic feminist. I'm a secular feminist. But here's why Amila Buturović is just as important for me as Nawal Saadawi. Because in 2005, so Amila Buturović has written a book called Quran and Women, which is a feminist reinterpretation of the Quran. And she's also written a book called Inside the Gender Jihad. In 2005, Amila Buturović became the first woman to publicly lead Friday prayer. So she gave the khutbah, yeah? The azan was given by a woman, and the khutbah, the sermon, was given by Amila Buturović. And behind her in New York City were 50 men and 50 women. I was one of those 50 women, and it was one of the most moving moments of my life. Now, when I prayed behind Amila Buturović, and she led us in this prayer, I prayed without my headscarf, I prayed next to a man, and I prayed on my period. That's a triple whammy, yeah? But that's the revolution. So, I have the secular feminist who says that God and religion is love, justice, and freedom. And I have the Islamic feminist called Amila Buturović, who gave herself, rightfully, the title Imam. And through both of them, I have embroidered my own feminism. So I think that all of these feminisms are really important. And some women who want to find feminism but need a religious bridge, I call it a bridge, yeah? I consider Islamic feminism that bridge. Because I know that for some women, I'm too much. I talk about sex all the time, I have red hair, I have tattoos, sex, all this business. So they want someone who is not so-called as radical as I am. Although my radicalism is very intentional and I enjoy provoking, and I think provocation and offense and insult are very necessary. For those women who want feminism but need someone to say to them, well, you know, verse so-and-so and ayah so-and-so can be interpreted in this way, I offer them the books of Amila Buturović and Asma Barlas and Kisha Ali and all these others, yeah? Because through them, at least, it opens the door to feminism. But I, personally, I am tired, I am fucking exhausted of having to negotiate for my humanity and my equality by saying, this verse says this, no, this verse says that, no, the Prophet said that, no, none of that. It is 2016. And if you do not believe in the equality and full humanity of a woman, I don't want to talk to you. It's that simple.
Yeah, that's right. The world is still full of people who will argue that, including those who in fact call themselves feminists but have an issue with you. They pick an issue with you precisely on that ground, that somehow what you do is representative of a very small segment of society, it's just yourself, and then, you know, there is the rest of us.
The masses.
There's the masses, yes, that need somehow.
Well, you know what I say to them? I say to them, the revolution is never, ever launched by the majority. Another personal hero of mine is a man who has long since left us, unfortunately. An Egyptian, secular, very leftist Islamic intellectual called Nasr Hamid Abu Zaid. And he was handed out of Egypt by Islamists in my country in the mid-90s because his criticism of the most fundamentalist kind of ulama from, you know, centuries ago offended them. And so they had the nerve to take him to court and fight to divorce him from his wife, who never complained. See, patriarchy, they own us, yeah? Even the wives. And they pushed for a court case in which he had to divorce his wife because they considered him no longer a Muslim, and a Muslim woman could not marry a man, and marry a non-Muslim man. And he would always say, and I love this, I loved him for this, the revolution is never launched by the majority because the majority is comfortable with the status quo. The revolution is always from the minority because the minority is suffering. The minority is fed up with the status quo, and the minority, passionate enough, is enough to launch the revolution. But to those same people who say this to me, I also tell them, look, I don't just fight the Muslim Brotherhood or the Salafis or the fundamentalists of my own background. In the United States, I fight what I call the Christian Brotherhood, because they exist. And when I lived in Jerusalem, I had felt the same about the Jewish Brotherhood, because they exist. And I fight, and when you see the United States today, in the United States today we have a fascist fuck called Donald Trump, who is pushing the world to a fucking disaster. And he has a vice presidential candidate who doesn't believe in the humanity of women or LGBTQ people. Between the two of them, and between the war on women's reproductive rights in the United States, where if you are poor or if you're a woman of color, you can barely afford contraception, let alone abortion, so it's basically just a luxury for white women now, I fight that. I fight the Christian Brotherhood in the United States. I fight the brotherhood of any religion. Hindu, when I'm in India, I fight that. Because most religions, with the exception of paganism and cosmological religions in Africa, so mostly the patriarchal Abrahamic religions, yeah, but also Hinduism, and to an extent Buddhism, most of them are by men and for men, and they act like their own women's bodies, and they're obsessed with our vaginas specifically. And my message to all of those religions, whatever background, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, is stay out of my vagina unless I want you in there.
It's a little bit difficult to pull you back into theoretical questions.
I'm talking about vaginas, darling. How can we get theoretical?
I will try. And I want to put you back into the question of dialogue with other women who fight for, particularly women's rights within the Islamic context.
Yes.
Whatever that is. I mean, we know that the boundaries are terribly porous. We don't know really where Islam is. That elusive person called Islam that disappears, goes this way.
When you find him, tell me.
Yeah, I'll tell you all that. But one of the question, or one of the criticisms that internally that happens is that people like Asma Barlas, and to an extent Amila Buturović, say that you really have to start with the foundational text. Otherwise you are dealing with symptoms. Otherwise, you're dealing just with, with the octopus, you need to hit the head, rather than. So, and that what we need to start with is a new epistemology, new way of knowing God, new kind of God conscious that starts with saying, okay, the Quran is anti-patriarchal text rather than conducive to patriarchy. But of course, because it can be either or. That the struggle is really to engage intellectually with the text and say, the way that Asma Barbas, for example, suggests that Abraham is not a patriarch, that he, in fact, is everything but a patriarchal person because God, after all, made the decisions for him, so he didn't really have that kind of power to. So it's these kinds of interventions, or the way in which Amila Buturović calls for gender jihad, that in a way transcends completely the traditional interpretations and engages in a very new way of looking at the Quran. And that's only after that, after we achieve that, can we in fact talk about behavior.
Right.
So that there is a little bit of, chicken and
I have no patience for that.
I perfectly agree with you. That there is but how does one nevertheless engage in a dialogue rather than create more rifts? And I'm asking you that because you are here, but also because I think people fear your going back to the performance. They fear your presence.
I'm too much for them.
You're too much for them.
And that's fine. That's fine.
You're too much even for Pamela Geller.
Fuck Pamela Geller.
I know, but you're too much for her. Who is, she has every institutional support behind her in the U.S. But so, what do you do to women who really want to do something, but they feel they cannot take your book and say, okay, I'll go and do the same thing. Okay. But I want to make a difference. Okay. How can you speak to them?
Okay, well, first of all, I think there's nothing wrong with rifts. I think that disagreements and I think that arguments are just fine, because I think in those places of rifts are often where the most interesting and exciting and necessary things happen. We need to see disagreements openly between people so that we recognize that we can think differently. So this need to be homogeneous and Islamic ummah and we all think the same thing is nonsense. It doesn't exist. There are 1.5 billion Islams out there. There isn't one Islam. There's no one figure that says I am Islam and I speak for you all. That's number one. And number two, you know what? I'm fine being on the edge of radical, because on the other edge of radical, you have these murderous raping shits called Daesh, ISIS, yeah? And they're on the extreme right wing, pulling us to another kind of disaster. I'm on the extreme left wing. I'm very happy on the extreme left wing. And here's the interesting thing with me doing all of this, oh my God, Mona's too much, Mona's too radical. What ends up happening? Well, I was in Lahore in February, yeah? And I began the feminist panel that we had with Fuck the Patriarchy, blah, blah, all of this. There was a Bangladeshi American academic who got into an argument with me because I fucking hate feminist theory, and she was all about feminist theory, and I don't have time for theory. I'm talking about women who were genitally mutilated. I'm talking about child brides in Yemen and in Egypt who are sold to rich men from Saudi Arabia. I'm talking about domestic violence in a country called Egypt where a husband has the right to beat his wife with good intention. What the fuck does good intention mean when it comes to domestic violence? So I don't have time for feminist theory. Yeah? I'm gonna punch you in the fucking face and say this is necessary, right? And after that, what happened after this feminist panel? Backstage, yeah, I got a group of young Pakistani women, and one of them was in a headscarf. And I talked about my own struggle, because I wore hijab for 9 years. I chose to wear hijab when I was 16, and I chose to take off my hijab when I was 25, that's 9 years. But it took me 8 years to take off my hijab. Why, if the hijab is something that is so easy to choose, is it more difficult to take it off than to put it on? So I talked about this in Lahore, yeah? So this young woman comes up to me with her group of friends in her hijab, and I thought she was going to fight with me. So I'm getting ready. And she says to me, I am where you were during those 8 years. My mother will not let me take off my headscarf. What should I do? So I said to her, I have a copy of my book here, and I would love to give you a copy of my book, if you can get it home, and your mother doesn't see it. Because it's very important for me that you read this book, because I felt an affinity with her. Because I could see myself, 20 years ago, whatever it was. 20, whatever, I can't think right now. But interestingly enough, it was a group of friends, so I made them promise that they would take my book and own it as a group of friends, and discuss it as a group of friends. So they gave it to her first to take home, and she said she was going to hide it and read it and make sure her mother doesn't see it. But then another one of the women wrote to me privately by email, and she said to me, it was really important for me to hear you speak, because I'm a queer identifying woman in Pakistan. And being queer identifying in Pakistan has its own challenges, just like this young woman in hijab fighting her mother has its challenges. So I'm fine being hated. I am fine being experienced. And they reminded me where I used to be. And what I did when I was their age was I took the books of Nawal Saadawi and Fatima Manisi home, and they were the shoulders upon which I stood. And I very humbly hope that my book is the shoulder upon which they stand, and that when they are able to break free of mothers and patriarchy and homophobia, that they go even further than I go. But arguments and rifts are perfect. Revolutions are a mess. Revolutions are not nice and polite. Revolutions are not, it's 9 o'clock now, we have to go home. Revolutions are about getting you in the gut, turning things upside down, destroying things, and then building something new that is fresh, that is independent of this shit. And you need rift and you need disagreement for that.
In light of that stance, which I think is really admirable, and not just that, it's very helpful, because I think that lots of people are hiding behind the norms, the mores, and everything else, and lack the inspiration. Tell us about the reception of the book elsewhere, outside of, as I understand, it's not translated into Arabic yet.
Yeah, this is my own personal sadness and very indicative of the need for revolution to continue.
Yes. And yesterday we were talking about the possible title for it. What is wonderful in Arabic, that the word hijab, which actually literally means membrane,
yes,
is also hijab, a reference to the
fucking
hijab.
hymen thing.
It's also a reference to hymen, so we have hijab and hijab. Hijab and hijab.
Hijab of the head and hijab of the vagina. Okay.
About your book and how it is received, but also in context of other creative work. I see this really as importantly as creative, it's a new genre in some ways of creativity. And I would like to ask you in that regard also, as a kind of continuation of that question, the people that we've just talked about, Fatima Manisi and Amila Buturović, they're all really academics. They're feminists, but they're also academics, and they write for academic audience. Where is the, and we are here in the Literary Festival, where is the culture of creativity? There is a cultural production that can support the revolutionary tone that you are suggesting.
Right.
And do you speak to them? Do you interact with them? Where are the people that you feel would be important to add? In North America, popular culture is actually very anti-feminist in some ways at the moment. The way in which, and I'm terribly surprised when my students come and say I'm not a feminist, because it has become a dirty word. Because they listen too much to hip-hop music, I suppose. But so
Beyonce is a feminist now, so we can start saving them. So it's okay. Thank you, Beyonce.
But how? Where are your peers in terms of the creative side of things, rather than only
Okay. Well, I'll tell you first of all how the book has been received. So Bosnian is the 10th language that my book has been translated into, and I'm very glad and honored that it's been translated into Bosnian, because this is the language that is closest to the Middle East and North Africa, which is the region that I write about. It's also supposed to come out in Turkish, but I'm not really sure when, so we're getting closer and closer. But when it does come out in Arabic, I'm not really sure what the reception will be like, because I will tell you a short story about, I gave a 12-minute interview in Arabic to France 24 when I was visiting France last year, when my book came out in France. And in 12 minutes, I was asked to describe what my book is about, and I was asked to define the sexual revolution. So this is by way of anticipating the reaction now that will come from the Arabic-speaking countries of the Middle East and North Africa. And the interview was broadcast during a 2-hour plane flight that I took from Paris to Budapest, because my book then came out in Hungarian of all languages. Anyway, so I go to Budapest, and I land at the airport, and I turn on my phone, and one of my friends writes to me, "What the fuck have you done?" And I said, "What happened?" And he told me in Arabic, #sexualrevolution is trending on Twitter, and you are being torn to shreds. So I had these guys writing to me things like, and I have to look it up in the Twitter archive. So when the sexual revolution, does that mean I can fuck you anytime I want? When we have a sexual revolution, does that mean when we're under curfew, we all go to the brothel, etc., etc.? But the worst was this very popular TV show, a host, called Tamir Amin, and he has a popular show on one of the Egyptian state TV satellite stations. And he just had this rant about me. I'm very proud of this rant. And he goes, "This woman, what does she want? Does she want us to go to Tahrir Square and strip?" And I'm like, "Yes, please do that." That would be fabulous.
Yeah, I'll choose the ones that choose.
Right? Does she want us like to all fornicate? What does this woman want? It was incredible. Incredible. Because I am talking about violence from the state towards women, violence from the home towards women, and women's ownership of our sexuality. And that alone. So that's a reaction. Now,
Talking about fitna.
chaos. I want chaos. But you know, I'm also convinced that in many, the discussion about Muslim women or feminism in the Middle East in those so-called Western contexts is often incredibly naive and simplistic. And all it has to discuss is, do women have the right to veil or not? That is the beginning and end of all discussions.
Yes.
Having said that though, some of the best attendees and discussants I've had in those so-called Western countries like Canada, like the United States, like France, like the UK, have been people who live in the so-called minority communities. So people of South Asian backgrounds in the UK. I was in Bradford in the UK, which has a long history of racism and religious fundamentalism, or in Toronto, or various cities. So South Asian, Middle Eastern, all these different backgrounds, because with them they understand what I'm talking about, just like here the audience also will understand because of the commonalities. But then I get these self-righteous white leftist men, okay? I got into this huge argument with a BBC radio journalist, and he had the nerve to tell me, your book, you want too much. You want too much, huh? I'm talking about the equality and humanity of women. And of course, being the typical kind of white male, he's going to explain mansplaining. You know that word mansplain, where a man explains your life to you? Right, so this BBC journalist is now going to explain to me my revolution. And he says to me, pontificating, "I know a married couple in Morocco, and for the woman to have the right to work outside the home, she had to negotiate with her husband by agreeing to wear the hijab. And so he allowed her to work outside the home. That's how you will bring change, of course, because the white man is going to liberate me and my sisters, yes? According to the timetable that he has." I was so fucking annoyed. It was just 20 minutes of an argument. At one point I said to him, because this is how my book is received by these white leftists who are trying to protect my culture and my religion from me, a woman who was shaped by this culture and religion. So at one point in the argument, this is all live on the radio, I said to him, "You know what? You're a white man who lives in London. What the fuck does this have to do with you? Why are you so upset? I'm Egyptian, I'm Muslim. What the fuck?"
The obsession with the piece of cloth that runs through all segments of society. Actually, I was going to ask you whether if you have heard Khalid Abu Fadl's fatwa in the US, in which he actually advocates not putting on the hijab to Muslim women, because his argument being that the cause, the operative cause for having a particular behavior is lost at this point in time in the US, because there's the issue of Islamophobia, in fact, exposes Muslim women who wear the hijab to violence rather than the other way around. So the hijab that is meant to protect women in the context of Muslim society is now actually giving them the opposite.
I have a huge problem with that. I have a terrible problem with that, as I do with many men.
Yes.
And I'm like, no more men in religion, please. No more men in many things, please. This idea that hijab is going to protect you, I reject this fundamentally and absolutely. Protect me against what? See, when I was a young woman in hijab, I would parrot this argument, right? But I reject this argument now, where I would say, I wear hijab because I want you to respect my intellect. I want you to speak to my intellect. I reject this now. My argument now is, you know what? I have breasts, I have hips, I have a backside, and you will respect my intellect despite and in spite of all of these things. I will not cover up so you respect me. So, what is the hijab protecting me from? The hijab is protecting me from men. Let men cover their eyes. Let the men cover their eyes. I'm not going to cover myself to be safe. I demand safety on the street. I will not cover up to be safe on the street. I want boys and men to be brought up with the education and the decency to stop assaulting women, not girls being put under curfew and covered up so that we can be protected. That is not protection. That is patriarchy and that is condescension. So number one. Number two, the other problem with that is, now I speak like this as someone who used to wear hijab a long time ago. Now my mother wears hijab. My mother has a PhD in medicine. My sister wears hijab and she's studying for a PhD right now. My mother wears hijab because she went on Hajj. We all went on Hajj. You can call me Hajj Ramona anytime. I have been on pilgrimage 4 times. Thank you. So after Hajj, my mother wore hijab, yeah? And she's been wearing it ever since 1982 when we moved to Saudi Arabia. And my mother wears hijab out of piety. My mother is convinced the Quran says wear hijab. I totally reject this argument. My sister, in the United States, both of them are in the United States. My sister wears hijab because she wants people to know she's a Muslim. In the United States right now, see, I talk about hijab here very openly and freely without many buts, because I'm guessing the majority of you come from a Muslim background of some shape or form. There is no Islamophobia here and there is no racism, yes? There are other ethnic problems, I understand, but that's not what I'm talking about. But when I talk about hijab in Paris, when I talk about hijab in London, when I talk about hijab in Toronto or in New York or in Dallas or in Houston, yeah, in Texas, this is how I talk about hijab. Hijab in a so-called Western context now, in the context of that fascist factor called Donald Trump, makes Muslim women visibly Muslim and it puts them on the front line of being attacked. I don't want Muslim women to take off the hijab so they don't get attacked. I want these fascist, racist shits to stop attacking Muslim women. In the same way that I'm saying men and boys must stop attacking women if they're not covered, you know? So I don't want women to wear or take off hijab to protect themselves from men. Women deserve protection. So when I'm in that so-called Western context where Islamophobia and racism are very much realities, and where the veil has now become the entry, the door that racists and Islamophobes use against Muslims, I am very careful in the way that I talk about hijab. And I now say, if you are a man, and if you are a non-Muslim woman, shut the fuck up about hijab. The conversation on hijab, shut up and listen to Muslim women. The conversation on hijab must be between Muslim women and led by Muslim women. I don't want, now when I say this, oh my God, I was talking about white leftist men, you should see the number of white feminist women. It's my right to talk about the hijab. I'm like, why? Why is it your right to talk about the hijab? This is my fight. This is my sister's fight. Why is it your right to talk about the hijab? So we don't even own our bodies in the global context, let alone the political context of the state. So as much as I admire Khalid Abdel Fadl, and he's gone a long way in deconstructing this hateful fundamentalist rhetoric, I hate this paternalistic, patronizing, take off the hijab because in the Middle East it protects you and in America it makes you in danger. No, stop attacking women, whether they're in hijab or not in hijab.
Nice. At this point, I would like to engage the audience because I do think that there is quite a bit here that people would perhaps want to react to or ask about or comment on. So, can we have, do we have microphones? Please.
Rabia!
Oh, Rabia is first.
I have a Rabia question.
You know, this is a question from the committee here.
The Committee of the Revolution, yes,
Yes.
go ahead.
Yes, it is. For such an intelligent woman, how can you support such a horrible, horrible team?
Manchester United, oh, I hate you. Okay, you have to know. You have to know. Okay, thank you. Manchester United fans say yes. No? Fuck all of you. No, okay, look, seriously. Rabia and Sasha and I, because Rabia introduced me to this list, we belong to a fantasy football league that is all writers and poets. And they're all Arsenal or Liverpool fans, and I hate them all. I'm only one of 2 Manchester United fans, and I have been a Manchester United fan since I was 9, so that's 40 years of being a Manchester United fan. So, and because they're a fucking brilliant team. Spoken like a true Arsenal fan.
Sorry, there are these lights.
Yeah, the lights, we
hands out there? Hands, please.
You know, we can talk some more.
I can ask, I can call people.
No, this is not the university, Amila.
Well, no, I can pretend it is.
We can talk some more. Ask me a question.
Zrinka, please.
I can project. As an arts
No, they need the microphone for the translation.
Okay.
As an Arsenal fan,
Oh, no.
my apologies. You mentioned Twitter and you use social media, and that is clearly useful in a context of clear and present danger for your life. But there is this other side of clicktivism, and I'd like to hear what you think about that,
Yes.
and the value that it adds or takes away from the movement and from what you're trying to do.
Right.
I understand. Did everyone hear this idea of slacktivism? You know, this idea where you go online and you like a Facebook page or you favorite a tweet and you think you've done something, you know, you've been revolutionary, and it's actually you've just, you know, liked a Facebook page. I understand that is a drawback of social media, but see, social media for me, I live on Twitter. I get my message across on Twitter. But beyond me, let's forget me for a few minutes, even though, like Rabia, I love to talk about me. But no one does it as best as Rabia does, and that's why I love you, Rabia. Social media, why are social media important? Social media are important because they have created a platform for people who had no platforms. So in the run-up to the revolutions in Tunisia and Egypt, etc., these were not revolutions, these were not Twitter or Facebook revolutions. That's like the most banal, asinine description of the revolutions ever. Revolutions need feet on the ground, feet of courageous people on the ground, willing to die, willing to be broken, willing to be imprisoned. That's a revolution, yeah? But in the run-up to that, how did we get people to go out on the street? For a large section of young people especially, in a country like Egypt where we had 30 years of a Mubarak dictatorship that didn't allow young people any voice in politics, in culture, in anything, those young people went on blogs when blogs were popular, or they went on Facebook, and then they went on Twitter to say I count, because we talked about I before. And online they found all of these other I's, and all of these other I's together, they created communities that were impossible to create, whether they were queer communities, or feminist communities, or anti-Mubarak, or atheist communities. One of my atheist friends in Cairo says that when they first began to meet in Cairo in the 1980s, there were 5 of them, and there were more undercover state security guys than there were atheists. Now, we have atheists in Egypt putting up on Facebook, I'm an atheist, and then getting arrested by a fascist dictator Sisi, but that's another story. Anyway, all of these I's, yeah, they met in the so-called virtual world, and when the revolution happened, they went out into the so-called real world. The social and the sexual revolution that I talk about now is happening in many places, including the so-called virtual world. So, for example, I follow many Saudi women. Saudi women on social media have had to contend with fatwas that say that they need to have a male guardian even when they go on Facebook. But the Saudi women that I follow, they curse out and say fuck you to the misogynist on Twitter, and Saudi men are not used to this. They go on Twitter and they organize driving campaigns where they break the ban on women driving through #WomenDrive, and they go on Instagram, and not only do they put a picture of their face, because they're not supposed to put a picture of their face, I follow Saudi women who put pictures of themselves on Instagram in bikinis. That, for me, is a form of social revolution and sexual revolution. When the social and sexual revolution is ready to go out in the so-called real world, all of these women and queer groups and all these others who found each other in the so-called virtual world will go out and create those feet of courageous people that will bring down the patriarchs. So I recognize that for some people, social media is empty and nothing, but for many of us, it's incredibly important because it's given us a platform that didn't exist. Everybody's very polite. There's nothing I said that offended you. I'm really upset. You're scared. That's more like it. It's okay, I don't bite unless you want me to.
Up there, yes, I see.
Hello, good evening.
Where are you? Wait,
Yes,
your
I'm here.
arms.
I'm here.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello, I'm here.
Oh, sorry, we are looking at one person here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hello,
Okay,
hello.
sorry, there's hello there.
Okay, so I'm here. Yes.
Okay, yes, sure, go ahead, please.
Okay. Good evening, Mona. It has been a really big pleasure to listen to you, to hear your attitudes and your points of view, which I share absolutely with you, and I totally agree with you. Normally, I wouldn't curse, but it's really necessary to curse. And I'm also a radical feminist, but not radical feminist in the context of hate against men, you know, just in the context of enlightenment. So basically, I would like to share plenty of things with you. So if I would use your language, the sexual language, I would say that I had plenty of orgasms now in this past hour.
I'm very glad.
And I would ask you, because there is probably not enough time, and probably there will be people that would want to ask you other questions. I would like to ask you, and I would like to say that this society, Bosnian society, it's a very, very misogynic society, and very patriarchal society, and that is the truth. They will tell you, maybe, in the conversation, non-formal conversation, that that's not true, but that is the truth. So I would like to ask you, as we know, it is the fact that all the religions, especially monotheistic religions, are patriarchal. But would you say that Islam is the most patriarchal religion? Would you say that?
First of all, thank you for your kind words, and I don't believe that radical feminism hates men. I think radical feminism, as any kind of feminism, fights patriarchy. It doesn't fight individual men. So if a man is not patriarchal, this idea that feminists hate men, I think, is nonsense and outdated. But anyway, I would also like to address the issue of my cursing, because, you know, friends who know me know that I curse all the time, whether on Twitter or in real life, so-called real life. And you know, what is the problem with cursing? I curse, you know, it's more misogyny is more offensive than my saying fuck, yeah? Rape is more offensive, and not for you, I mean generally, because I often get men who come online and say to me, you should stop saying fuck all the time, because people won't listen to you. Well, those people won't listen, you know, it's their loss. Because this is how I express myself, and I think that we need to focus on the real offense, or the real insult, the real insult, not offense, the real insult and the real injury is misogyny, or rape, or homophobia, or injustice. That's much more insulting than my saying fuck. Having said that, do I think Islam is the most misogynistic or patriarchal religion? No. I think that, as I said, I mean, listen, I moved to Jerusalem very soon after I left Saudi. Well, it wasn't that soon, but anyway, I went from Saudi Arabia to Egypt to Jerusalem, yeah? Walking through the streets of West Jerusalem where I lived, I would be walking often next to an ultra-Orthodox Jewish family who looked just like a Saudi family. The man is walking 10 meters ahead, the woman is behind with 5 kids, her hair is covered, and she's wearing long sleeves. She looks just like a Saudi woman. And this is Judaism, yeah? So, and the Christianity that I fight against in the United States, I was in Houston, Texas, like I said, and when I start saying things like the Christian Brotherhood and stay out of my vagina unless I want you in there, I had these white Christian people get up and leave, and I was like, bye. So, you know, no, it's the people who are insistent, and I reject this. I believe it's everybody's right to have multiple partners. So one of the things that they're fighting against in Nigeria is this idea that a man has the right to have all these multiple wives, and often they're quite young, you know, these child brides. So, and these are not Muslims. And the Nigerian parliament tried to pass a bill very similar to the bill in the Lebanese parliament, and very similar to a bill they're trying to pass in Pakistan, and a bill that they keep trying to renew in the United States, but it has been renewed in the United States, that protects women against violence. And often the most vehement opponents of these kind of bills are the most religious, whether they're the Christians in the United States, the Christians and Muslims in Lebanon, or those who practice more traditional, or whatever you want to call them, religions in Nigeria and other African countries. I think what it is about Islam is that we are watching Islam go through, like, its teenage years, 24-hour news and social media. When Christianity went through this, we did not have 24-hour news, we didn't have CNN, we didn't have Twitter. So when you know, the regressive, backward, misogynist shits of, say, Isabel and Ferdinand, who had the Inquisition, where, you know, executing people if they said the wrong thing about religion in 1492 or whatever it was in Spain, we were not watching this on CNN. We were not reading about this on Twitter, yeah? So all of these religions are by men and therefore men. And they, as part of their core message, is the control of women, specifically women's sexuality. Can I say something about something that you brought up before about the need to address the root texts before we get to the behaviors? Another objection I have to that, and that ties in with Islam, is who determines what the parameters of what I can speak about? Who determines that? Because I want to fight, for example, child marriage, yeah? The clerics in a country like Yemen, when feminist groups in Yemen insist on putting an age limit to marriage, so they want it to be 17 and above, the clerics in Yemen say no, this is anti-Islamic, as they do in Pakistan, because they say Muhammad married Aisha when who knows when, because people argue, yeah? 6, 9, 19, I really don't care. What I do care about is in 2016, it is a crime to have sex with a child, it is pedophilia, and you belong in jail. I'm not going to argue about what happened in the 7th century. But these same clerics, yeah, they do not tell you that Muhammad married Khadija as his first wife. Khadija was his employer. Khadija was a woman who was married and widowed and divorced many times. Khadija was very rich and powerful. Khadija proposed to Muhammad, and Khadija was 15 years older than Muhammad. She was 40 and he was 25. Now, I have a thing for younger men, and I like this model very much. It is my sunnah, okay? This is my sunnah. They don't talk about Khadija, yeah? They only talk about Aisha. Why do they not talk about Khadija? So I have a solution for the unemployed men of the Middle East. Marry the rich older women. I'm not rich though. Marry the older women, yeah? I would like a cleric in the Middle East and North Africa or in any Muslim country to say to the unemployed men, and we have many, do the sunnah of the Prophet and marry an older woman who has money. This will solve so many problems. But no one says this, yeah?
Thank you very much.
On that note, actually, I do think actually you brought up something earlier as we talked, and I think it's perhaps can be brought up now. This idea of, I mean, we live in an age in which there is no genuine movement that can resist, that can reject and kind of offer some kind of alternative to this neoliberal capitalist kind of world, the worldview and structure. And so where socialism used to be some kind of an answer, now it's these reactionary movements, lots of fundamentalist movements, and they talk to each other. I mean, I think that there is, at some level, really, I think, quite counterproductive to tear them apart. I mean, obviously they have their specificities, but they've really united across the board. So the Jewish fundamentalists talk to Muslim fundamentalists, who talk to Christian fundamentalists, and they're all
the same.
Perfectly.
Yes.
They agree so well among each other.
And a part of that as well is Donald Trump and Marine Le Pen and Boris Johnson as the Foreign Secretary of the UK and all of these crazies. They all are on the same side.
They're all on the same side, and they're really buying the souls of young people.
Yes.
In a very
Through fear.
Through the fear.
Yes, absolutely.
There was...
Yes.
Hi. So here's the thing I struggle with as a woman living in New York City on a daily basis. I know I have the right to do what I want, where I want, as long as people around me, there's consent. But it's oppressive every single day to have men in my personal space. And at some point, when I think about college rapes and I think about my nieces who are 5 and 6, in the end, I don't live in a world where men are educated and are going to leave me alone. And so there's this feeling like I have this added burden of having to take care of myself because I can't expect the society around me to do so.
Yes.
And I just wanted to talk to you about that and hear more about what you have to say, because I mean, I should be able to wear what I want, but it doesn't always work like that.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I understand exactly. I have women who come to my events, of various backgrounds, like non-Muslim white American women who say to me, look, I'm really struggling because my daughter is 17 and I see what she wears to school every day, and I tell her, I don't know if your male teachers, and you hear about all these male teachers who complain about how short the skirts of their students are. We get into these big fights about, the male teachers shouldn't be looking at their students like that. And this mother was telling me, I'm really struggling because the feminist in me believes that she should own her body and own her sexuality. But the realist in me knows that we're not in that post-feminist society because there's no post-anything. And she truly worries about her daughter. And that's the dilemma, isn't it? And I think that dilemma is a constant until we have that social sexual revolution globally, not just in my part of the world. And I consider the United States one of my worlds. I will share with you, by way of moving that social sexual revolution forward, what I learned when I was in South Africa. I was in Johannesburg at the end of May. And wherever I go, I usually reach out to feminist groups and LGBTQ groups because as I said, we're allies and I want to learn the stories of the various contexts that I go to as part of that global feminism spectrum. So when I was in Johannesburg, I met with activists who are part of a movement in their country, a revolutionary movement really, that is reviving the spirit of the Soweto uprising. For those who don't know about the Soweto uprising, in 1976, in June 16 of 1976, depending on whose story you read, between 100 to 600 school children, black South African school children, were killed by white apartheid police because they protested against the imposition of the language of apartheid, Afrikaans, in the education system, because the apartheid government wanted these kids to grow up to be maids and drivers and gardeners, basically the servants of the apartheid regime. So these school children between the age of 9 and 15 went marching as a protest in Soweto, and they were gunned down by white apartheid police. For many South Africans, that is one of the revolutionary catalysts of the end of apartheid, which came much later in 1994. These students who are part of the Fees Must Fall movement, a current revolutionary movement in South Africa that is reviving the spirit of the Soweto uprising, and they're fighting against the increase in university fees in South Africa, and against decolonization. And they place themselves firmly as part of what they call the Black global struggle. So they very much identify with Black Lives Matter, which in the United States I also believe is a revolutionary movement that was launched, by the way, by 3 queer Black women. So again, the intersection of race, class, and gender. Part of the Fees Must Fall movement were a group of women who wanted the Fees Must Fall movement to focus on sexual violence on university campuses. Many of you might know that South Africa has one of the world's highest sexual violence rates, which is tragic and terrible, and also one of the world's highest HIV/AIDS rates. So these women wanted the men of the revolution, as I said, not all men of the revolution are feminists, to struggle with them against, or to fight with them against sexual violence. And the men were not receptive to this idea. What a surprise. So the feminists in the Fees Must Fall movement began to protest across university campuses across South Africa. Some of them following their tribal traditions, whether they were Zulu or Xhosa or others, took part or staged their protests in the nude, because it was traditional in their tribal societies that the biggest form of protest for women was in the nude. Many of these protests became so large across some of the university campuses that in one particular university, Wits University, the administration suspended classes. Now, I wish in the United States that we had such a revolutionary feminist movement that would do more than that university student at Columbia who walked around with her mattress. Many of you might have seen her on the news. I wish women across every campus across the world would do what these South African women did and shut down their universities. Because I don't know what the rate is in South Africa, but it's very high. So I think that I'm not saying it's on us to change it, because obviously it's a holistic thing. But we do have a role in fighting back. We have to fight back. And those women are incredibly inspirational to me. In a very similar way, within the Black Lives Matter movement is another movement called Say Her Name. Because again, Black women in the United States, I very much identify with Black feminism, because Black feminism is fighting racism and misogyny, and as I said, class issues. What the Say Her Name movement does is they want to remind people that it's not just Black men who are killed by the police, it's Black women, like Sandra Bland, who somehow, because she was arrested and jailed for a traffic violation, ended up dead. And the police claim she committed suicide, and many of us do not believe this scenario. So in San Francisco and other cities in the United States, the Say Her Name movement often protests topless with the Black Power salute up, and across their chest they've written Say Her Name. So we as women, as part of this disagreement, as part of this disruption, we have to disrupt. And we have to go out there and disrupt the normal status quo attempt and approach to things. And we have to turn it upside down, so that it's no longer a dilemma for a mother to look at her daughter when she leaves the house and think, can I let her leave the house like this? Because the men out there are behaving rather than us controlling the women to help them behave.
I think I saw another hand up there. Yes.
It's interesting that there are no men who are asking.
I have to speak like
It's
this.
very
I can't
interesting.
hear. Okay, so hello?
Hello.
Hello. It's really nice to have you here. So I wonder, when you say Islam and Christianity and Judaism, like when you're talking about religion, are you talking about religion itself or about the interpretation of religion? Because as a Muslim, I feel very offended when you say that religion itself is for men and by men, because I don't think that Islam is for men and by men. I think it's very not patriarchal.
Yes.
So I just wonder, how do you define religion? How do you define Islam when you say that it's for men and by men?
Okay, thank you for your question, and I'm glad you're here. And I have to tell you, I'm just going to say it, it's fine for you to be offended. It's absolutely no problem whatsoever for you to be offended. And I maintain that Islam and all religions are by men and for men. And we have to, wait. We, as Muslim women, have to learn to live with each other's disagreements. And I recognize I offended you, but I'm not taking back what I said. I don't think it's a matter of interpretation, and you will hold on to your offense, and that is totally fine. Because in that rift between us, we create the cracks in which something better for the future will come. I will not take it back and you will not change your mind, and that is fine.
No, I totally agree. That's awesome. I love to disagree. But I just think that, I just wonder, well, how do I'm asking this question, like,
Yes,
regardless whether
it's clear. Look, it's clear in the Quran, okay? There is a verse in the Quran that most men have taken to mean that they have the right to beat their wives. That is patriarchy through and through. It is clear in the Quran that a man has a right to marry 4 wives, and I don't have the right to marry four men. That's patriarchy through and through. It's clear in the Quran that a man inherits double what a woman inherits. That's patriarchy through and through. This is not even interpretation. We get to the interpretation on the finer details. So I'm telling you, as a Muslim woman, the Quran is clearly patriarchal. I tell you about an activist who I dearly admire, and I mention her in my book. South African Islamic scholar, yeah, called Saadia Sheikh, okay? She has a study circle of women. She tells them, take a pen, open the chapter in the Quran, Surah An-Nisa, where it says that you can beat your wife, and cross it out. Now, most Muslims will tell you that is blasphemy. I celebrate that. You know why I celebrate that? Because we have to move beyond that. We're still arguing in 2016. I can go to YouTube and put Islam, wife beating, and I get dozens, hundreds of imams, yeah? Beard this long, standing on his minbar, describing to men the 4 types of women that you can beat. I'm proud to say I'm 3 of those types. They stand on the minbar, yeah? You can beat her on her side, you can beat her on her back, but do not beat her on her face, because you can only beat a dog. You know this nonsense. I'm done with this nonsense. When I was younger, yeah? When I was younger, and I wasn't as courageous, and I didn't have as much power as I have now, because now I do have power, I used to say this. I used to say, no, it's not Islam, it's the interpretation. No, it is Islam, just as it is the Old Testament and the New Testament. But what have Jewish feminists and Christian feminists done? And what have others who want to continue to identify done? They have looked at the part of their holy scripture and text and said, you know what? We can't do this anymore. We are human beings in 2016, not 650 Arabian Peninsula. We have to be honest. We cannot move forward unless we're honest. Islam and every religion is patriarchal, and we have to move beyond that for a better future, for our boys and girls.
Yeah, this is our last question, and symbolically it's...
I'm going to stand up purely for respect.
Thank you. I think you have to wait for the microphone because of the interpretation.
Translation.
Translation, thank you. Interpretation, I'm obsessed.
Yes, Adam needs translation.
Sorry.
Hi, my name is Adnan.
Yes.
I'm white Muslim, I'm 38 years old.
Yes. Adnan, are you proposing marriage to me?
I came with my wife. I would like to exercise
I'm
myself.
joking, okay?
Hi. Never in my life I would think that I would say this, but I fully support you. I just came back from a 5-year mission in Iraq, and what I learned in the Arabic world as a Muslim, that we as white Muslims, we are not accepted by Arabs. Only if you do the favors, you're accepted as a Muslim, but if you don't do the favors, you're no Muslim. They will not accept us as Muslims. Yeah. However, on the other hand, what I've noticed by being someone who used to like to work out, is that they like my ass so much. And when I tell them that's not good, they say, yes, but it's only to exercise. So, the man cause, for them it's only exercise. And I like what you say, but I will disagree with some people who say that you are the feminist. No, you say what I think. And I think that my freedom stops where your freedom begins. And this is my point. So if you say yes, then I go. If you say no, I say no. My final question, how the hell did you hold up for 29 years? Being such a beautiful woman, for 29 years.
Sit down, your wife is sitting next to you. Stop talking. Okay, listen. I'm not sure I understood the thing about your backside. Are you talking about gay men in Iraq? I did not get that point about...
Oh, they're all gay. for.
Well, I'm fine. Listen, I'm fine with gay men. I told you, LGBTQ issues, call me queer, call me a queer ally, whatever you want. I don't care who you have sex with, as long as you have their consent. Do you want to have sex with a man? You want to have sex with a woman? You want to have sex with a trans person? Have sex with whoever you want to, as long as you have their consent, and you know, everyone is a consenting adult, yeah? No, but I am a feminist, and it's very important for me to identify as a feminist. I insist on being called a feminist. And what you said about Arabs or the people in Iraq not accepting you as a Muslim, there's a genuine problem in Islam, in that Arabs think they own Islam, and that unless you speak Arabic, and you're not the first person to tell me this, my South Asian Muslim friends, my Muslim friends from various African countries in which Arabic is not an indigenous language, my Muslim friends in Indonesia and Malaysia, in which again Arabic is not an indigenous language. So we're talking about the minority of Muslims in the world speak Arabic, yeah? And they act like they own Islam because Islam is in Arabic, and that's nonsense. When I go to Malaysia, you know, when I went to Malaysia I've been to Malaysia several times. The first time I went to Malaysia, there was an event for the Body Shop. You know the Body Shop, yeah? That shop that sells no animal testing products and all that, although they've changed now. So they had an event to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Body Shop in a 5-star hotel in Kuala Lumpur, yeah? On every third table was a trans woman. These were the employees of all the body shops across Malaysia. Every third table was a trans woman. Now, I lived at the time, I was living in New York City. I'd been in New York City for about 10 years. I have never attended a function in New York City in a 5-star hotel in which every third table was a trans woman. Not only that, but at the end of the night, the best dressed employee went to a trans woman called Sally. This is in the Islamic Republic of Malaysia, yeah? And my friends tell me that their gay friends and their trans friends go to Friday prayer with makeup and all of this. So clearly, in Malaysia, there's a sexual fluidity that does not exist in other parts of the world. So, and they're Muslims, right? So we Arabs do not own Islam. We Arabs, with our very specific approach to masculinity and femininity, which I'm fighting against, who would look in horror at their fellow Malaysian Muslims and how they allow this sexual fluidity, it would blow their mind. Islam does not belong to Arabs. Islam belongs to everyone who identifies as a Muslim, whatever part of the world they live in. And why I waited until I was 29, I tell you honestly now, sincerely, I feel sorry for my younger self that I waited this long. But I have to tell you, and one of the reasons that I speak so openly and explicitly about sex, and I share my own personal story, is because I believe that when we began to march against Hosni Mubarak in 2005, the political revolution begins with breaking the barrier of fear. The social sexual revolution, in my opinion, begins with breaking the barrier of taboo and shame. I cannot ask younger women, because I remember myself when I was younger, to break that barrier of taboo and shame unless I share with them my own stories of breaking the barrier of taboo and shame. And that's why I talk so openly. When I was in the UK, I was in Bradford, I met Muslim women who would come and whisper to me, and a woman gives, unless it involves a penis and a vagina. Where is virginity when it's 2 penises? Where is virginity when it's 2 vaginas? We don't think like that, yeah? So this idea, this concept of virginity is about men owning women's bodies and taking something, and we have to break that. And I think the more explicit we are in owning our bodies and saying we deserve pleasure and we deserve desire, the more explicit we are in saying the social and sexual revolution is the way to true freedom, the more I think that our women, especially, will be liberated from this. And I want to end on a note from, at this conference, at this literary festival in Bradford, was an imam, a Salafi imam, who thought he was very cool because he's a sex expert for his congregation, yeah? And he said, you know, I get phone calls from men who say to me, I want to practice BDSM with my wife, but she thinks it's haram. Will you please talk to her? So the imam picks up the phone, and he speaks to this poor woman who has come from a village in Pakistan, because this is how he describes it, yeah? He goes, so I've got this woman who doesn't speak English, she speaks only Punjabi or Urdu or whatever, from this village in Pakistan, who now lives in Bradford or London or whatever, and he says to her, sister, your husband is right. There is nothing wrong with this kind of sex. If he wants you to beat him, you should beat him. If he wants you to pour candle wax on him, you should do that. Now, he's a man, yeah? Answering the need of another man. I'm putting myself in the shoes of the woman. Can you imagine how the sister feels? I want you to reverse the scenario. That this sister, from a village in Punjab or wherever, moves to the UK with her husband. She's a good Muslim woman, yeah? She says to her husband, you know what? I like rough sex. I want you to pour candle wax down my back. Can you imagine his reaction? He's not going to call the imam and say, will you please, she's not going to call the imam and say, talk to my husband. Her husband is going to say to her, who have you done this with before? Did you have sex before I saw you? Did you kiss someone before? This nonsense, you know? So we don't even have a parity of sexual deprivation. The sexual deprivation belongs to only women. So we have to break these taboos. We have to tell women it is your right to experience and earn pleasure and desire. That's the revolution.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This means a lot to me. Thank you. Well, Mona, I think this is the testimony to how wonderful this has been, how educational,
Thank you, Amila.
how instructional, and how prescriptive. And I suggest to everybody to get a copy of freshly published book in our languages. Trust me, you don't need coffee in the morning after you read this. Please be well. You can of course talk to Mona now. We'll have a bit more informal discussion or conversation. Thank you everybody for coming, and thank you very much.